Hi, everybody. Glad you're here today. I'm so excited to have Cliona with us, who hails from one of my ancestral lands in Ireland. Uh, she's going to talk about communication and the environment and probably a whole lot of things. I first wanted to give a shout out to Allison Toe, who's going to be collaborating with us, helping us to run meetings, sessions. Really glad to have her help. So thank you so much, Allison. And Cleona has told us that we can, within reason, pretty much jump in and ask questions whenever we have them. It's going to be kind of a loose discussion, but as always, leave room for those people who only use the chat to communicate, so they get proper recognition. If you want something read out loud for the group, if you don't want to speak but just communicate that way, please put read before your comment and we'll share that verbally. Let's make sure that people get plenty of chances to join in and participate. Let's be aware of respecting people's turn taking. And of course, we're always warm and respectful, and I love that about our group. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Cliona.
Thanks, Dawn, and welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be here. So I'm going to talk about communication in general, and then I suppose specifically my own experience of communication as a late diagnosed autistic person. So I got a diagnosis when I was 53, which was quite late in life, and I think for me it explained a lot of communication difficulties I had throughout my life. And as Dawn said, I have prepared some notes to try and keep vaguely on track, but I may meander here and there, and I completely welcome if people have thoughts or anything they want to add to what I'm saying. So to give a little bit of background, I'm from Ireland and I did my bachelor's degree in French and Old English. And I suppose I've always really been interested in languages, the power of words, how we communicate. And, looking back, I think maybe part of that fascination was that I always felt very unable to interact with people. I always kind of looked at sort of the outside society and kind of was just amazed by how people seem to just so easily, talk to each other. So yeah, I've always been really interested in languages, how they evolve, their place in culture, the connection of language and place, I suppose, as well. So as I said, I studied Old English, which is basically English up to Shakespeare. So if you look at the text of Beowulf, it looks like a completely different language. It's, more similar to Nordic languages, I suppose. And for me, that's quite significant because I think it really shows how language evolves, that it's never a static thing, it's always evolving. And connecting that to autism and how autistic people speak or interact, I suppose what is important to me is that we kind of explore those differences and kind of work towards making them more acceptable, because I think how autistic people communicate is still very stigmatized, still very misunderstood, even to the extent that I think people can understand if autistic people are non-speaking because it's more tangible. But I think the more subtle sort of breakdowns in communication can be quite hard for people to get. And I have had so many misunderstandings in my life because of my direct speaking, or, I had an experience this week of asking a question in a work setting, and it was interpreted as me not wanting to do the work, whereas actually I was just trying to clarify what needed to be done. But yeah, I suppose when I mean, I was doing a lot of research before I got my diagnosis, but and now I'm doing a diploma in autism studies. And one of the real, I suppose, light bulb moments of research for me was reading Damien Milton's The Double Empathy Theory. And what that explains is that whereas autistic communication has been sort of framed in a sort of very pathologizing way as deficits, he explores the idea that how we communicate is just different, and that neurotypical people communicate in a different way, and that what we need is, there isn't a right or wrong. What we need is more understanding that both sides need to make an effort, I guess. So yeah, I think, kind of going from that as well, and just to talk a little bit more about my own experience. As a child, I would have been described as painfully shy, I suppose, but I remember the experience of having words in my head and literally being completely physically unable to get them out. And as time went on, through masking, through imitating other people, I developed the ability to be able to sort of converse and fit in and so on. And then around the time I got my diagnosis, I had kind of reached such a peak of burnout that I was finding the level of masking I had been doing just impossible. Couldn't do it anymore, which was one of the reasons I went and got a diagnosis. Excuse me, I'm just going to take some water. Um, so what was I? Yeah, so I think, I suppose as well, that idea of communication and language and how we express ourselves is, in society, to me, it's a very stultified thing. It doesn't allow for difference, it doesn't allow for change, it doesn't allow for exploration. And I think a lot of that for me is that the language we use now, like the English language, is so rooted in colonialism and hierarchies and, status, social status. And if you can't perform this kind of social status, you're seen as, inadequate, or you're doing things wrong. And this is very much where, I suppose, going back to the origins of research on autism, the communication differences were one of the things that were highlighted, because, autistic people don't communicate, they don't respond to things, visually, the facial expressions, body language, how we speak. We can be very direct and very forthright, I suppose, in a way that kind of bypasses these subtle social kind of requirements, I guess. And all of that, I think, means that, certainly for me, it made me feel very much on the outside of things for most of my life. I felt that just whatever this secret code that people had was, I just didn't have any access to it. And, it's been really interesting for me to, read Damien Milton's work, and, a lot of other work that has come out of that, and research I've read kind of more recently, showing that, neurotypical people can, even without knowing that somebody's autistic, can make thin slice judgments. And, that's also another piece of research showing, when people were shown videos of autistic and, neurotypical people, that they could they expressed a dislike for the autistic people. And I found that really interesting, because it wasn't clear from the research what it was that was kind of being identified that triggered a dislike. And I think part of it maybe is that neurotypical people find it hard to read us, to read and make an assessment of us, and then that creates a kind of a level of fear, or something like a subconscious fear. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I just think it's a really interesting topic. And then I suppose, you know, different to speaking. My essay, which is in the book that's upcoming in Ireland, it's an anthology of Irish autistic voices. But I wanted to talk about autistic joy, and a huge joy for me has always been reading and then writing. And whereas verbally, I can find it very hard to express myself unless I script or prepare really thoroughly. I can, lose words if I'm tired or upset. Everything gets very jumbled up. I have always been able to write really fluently. It feels like a fluency that I don't have verbally. And for me, it's kind of like all the jumbled up information in my brain. When I'm writing, I'm just sort of plucking out little bits and bringing it together, and making sense out of everything, I suppose. And reading, as a child, and I actually think that a lot of my kind of masking or being able to fit in came from just reading book characters, and how they behaved, and I would sort of go, "Oh, okay, that's how you behave." um so reading has always been a huge joy for me, and because I felt I could connect to characters um in a way that I probably couldn't in my day-to-day life. um so yeah, that's I could talk a little bit more, but if anybody wants to, ask anything or say anything, do please. Because mainly the next thing I wanted to talk about, yeah, like I suppose cultural narratives around autism. And, apart from my diagnosis giving me the information that helped me to understand myself, I feel one of the huge benefits for me has been to have access to a community of people who do communicate in ways that are similar to mine and that are understandable to me. And that has been so incredibly life affirming for me. It has been an amazing journey, and I'm very lucky now in that I can, I have autistic friends who live locally. There are support groups in Ireland that I go to online, and those spaces to me always feel a lot more accepting of communication differences, a lot more patient, and very different to kind of my normal work environments, I suppose. And yes, what I wanted to mention as well, because climate work is another thing I do, like both in a voluntary capacity, but it's also my job. And I find that part of climate work, well, one of the key parts of climate work to me is dismantling colonial ideas about land and, about the environment. And I suppose within that, that area, this has been a place where I've experienced, a gentler way of communicating. I've been in different groups, and I know that groups like Extinction Rebellion, they use a non-hierarchical structure. I did a master's level certificate in global citizenship education, and that course really showed me the value of self-reflection about thinking, but also it was an incredibly respectful space when it comes to communicating with other people, and the value of listening to people, giving them space is, I think, really important for all of us, whether we're autistic or not autistic, whoever we are, giving people that space to formulate their thoughts. And very different, I suppose, to very hierarchical structures where the largest person tends to get the most airtime, and those kind of spaces always feel like a really bad fit for me. So yeah, I might pause there just to see if that's okay, if anybody wants to come in, and then we can take it from there.
I had my hand raised. I don't know if everyone can see it, but
Yeah.
and a note to everybody who's participating. You can either raise your hand in the screen or use the icon under the reactions button. But I wanted to just say one of the first things that struck me so profoundly when I started the ethnography project in this group 3 years ago was how little governance needed to happen. We now have over 1,300 people, and we have amazingly few problems on Facebook, and very few problems in sessions communicating. I think that just speaks volumes to how we operate as relational culture, that we become more than the sum of the parts rather than a hierarchical structure where, like you said, the bully essentially, I mean, I feel like that's what it is. The bully gets to speak the most. So I try not to jump in too much for that reason. But yeah, I'm very proud of that. Thanks for bringing that out, and I'll turn it over to everybody else.
So I had my hand raised. I also made a comment in the comment section. I want to go back to a comment that Cleone made about talking about the English that we speak being rooted in colonialism itself. And I live in the United States. I was not diagnosed until I was 54. So I grew up in this, but I'm also a savant in a way that makes it so I can like earn degrees. So I am very highly educated, but I also grew up very poor. And my grandparents were undocumented illegal aliens from Ireland who were in what I call indigenous Irish. I mean, yes, and spoke no English. So my father grew up in a household where it was immigrant parents speaking no English. His particular brilliance was philosophy of science. That's what he ended up his degree in. However, I grew up in a household where he was also very, very violent, very hating of himself. I'd want to know about my Irish culture, and he'd say, "You don't want to know." He said, "Your looks now, you wouldn't know it now, but you look black Irish. Tell everyone you're half Spanish, a quarter Greek, and a quarter Russian." That's what I do, and I get away with it. Because he was so discriminated against, so denied his identity, not because he was autistic, although we think maybe he was, but because he was Irish and also like brilliant in academia, but never adopted the way of speaking that I have now given a name to. I think it's a dialect, and that I put in the chat, college educated white American vernacular English. Myself in school, again, without knowing it, I felt like English itself was toxic. Like the language coming at me was toxic. It was hurting my brain. and I refused to adopt it. It didn't make any sense to me. So I never spoke in English class in 8th grade, and my parents were told I was going to be given D's, even though I got everything else right, because I was quote unquote defiant and refusing to speak when I was simply mute. And it wasn't just a muteness that was kind of like, I'm confused. It was a muteness like, I'm not going to speak this language that hurts people. And what I found when I was older and much more involved just through circumstance in the Black community was that the Black English vernacular was the opposite. I felt like I could be myself. I felt like the language itself was kind, it was the only way I could explain it, was like kind to my head. And it's because that form of English is relational. And I concentrated specifically on the word we, that pronoun, because I would find in seminars or whatever it be, we all know. And I'd say to myself, well, I don't know that, and I don't even think it's true. So why is the we being expressed? And I finally learned that the we was deliberately meant like we, the people of the United States. It excluded people. Whereas when I'm in the Black community, I instantly know, and sometimes someone will say, we don't mean you, if they're talking about those people as opposed to we, but I instantly know it was a community we. And that difference, that when you use we, you know it can never include the whole world, and that white English vernacular assumes that it includes the whole world because it's got that colonialness built into it. And what I'm very curious, since our speaker is from Ireland, my sense of the English being so toxic, I feel I got from my father, and I feel it's based in the Irish language history and how that's structured, because I believe, and I'm trying to learn it, but I don't know enough to know, that that language itself, because it's not a colonial language, it's actually got some relational aspects just built into the fact that it's corresponding with the culture itself. So I know that's a long kind of statement, but I'm either mute or I go long. So please forgive me for that.
That's so interesting, Lucy, about your ancestry, and you know that's kind of connected to that. Something else I kind of wanted to bring up is
What really
fascinates me is that in some languages there are words to express things that literally don't have a translation in English.
and I think
The Irish language, yes, would I mean, for anybody who doesn't know a lot about Irish history, I mean, the Irish language was basically beaten out of us, and it became
I think a lot of people
absorbed.
as well, consciously a level of shame around it. Now, I mean, everybody in Ireland speaks
English now, but there is a huge movement to kind of revitalize Irish, and Irish is such an absolutely beautiful, poetic language and connected to the environment. There are Mancha Magan has written a book about Irish words and how many Irish words there are for different kinds of plants or soils, or like it's very deeply, to me, very deeply connected to the land that we live in as well. But yeah, I really identify with a lot of what you said there.
I think has had his hand raised. Speak.
Yes. Thank you, Cliona, for presenting today. I this topic is so interesting because I have been looking at supplementing my verbal communication with augmentative and alternative communication devices, and using a device to supplement my speech, because I have I think what's known as cluttering. I clutter my words, and I have a hard time expressing myself verbally, and um, I it's easier for me to actually write, um, to communicate than it is to speak. And I think AAC might be a good alternative for me. And just so fascinating, just the various ways of communication, especially with us autistic people. And I just appreciate, that we have these different methods of speaking or communicating, I should say. And thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, that pressure to be verbal, I think that's why I don't know a huge amount about AAC devices, but I think it is amazing, and that we should have alternative ways of communicating so that everybody can feel included. And actually, interestingly, there's an Irish author who's actually the editor of the book that's coming out, but she is autistic and she has neurodivergent kids as well. And I was reading in one of her earlier books that they use AAC devices at home, like all of them. If she's very tired, it has just become a habit. And I thought that was amazing. Like the option to kind of use something else when you just feel too tired to actually, cope with conversation.
Oh yes, especially autistic burnout. Being especially using AAC for that, because a lot of times, it's hard for me to express my thoughts when I'm in burnout. So definitely something I'll use.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks for sharing. I think you had your hand up for a while too.
I agree. This is such a great conversation. My background is speech therapy, and I've always loved communication. And I'm a very loud verbal communicator, so I apologize for those of us that do dominate the conversation. However, the colonialism, I thought that was a really interesting point that you brought up, and I wanted to share a story for context in terms of people not understanding that there are different ways to communicate and accepting that there are different ways of communicating, which is astounding to me because everyone uses text messaging. Nobody wants to talk on the phone anymore, but all of a sudden we can't use AAC devices because that's not a method of communication. I'm like, who's talking to anybody anymore? However, I will quickly share a story about a family that I worked with, and the dad kept saying his autistic son would not use greetings. And, my perspective is, well, because greetings are ridiculous and kids don't care. Like, they really just don't care. That's why we have to say, as adults, say bye to your mom, say bye to auntie. Children just don't care, right? They're just living in their little world trying to play. So the dad wanted to show me how his son could not communicate greetings. And he said, come here, we're on Zoom. Come and tell Miss bye. Wave bye to Miss. He won't wave, he won't wave. So the little boy comes over. He sees me. Bye, Miss. He didn't wave, I'm sorry. He said bye, and he walked off, right? I'm like, okay, great. He just communicated. See ya, I'm done. The dad said, come back, wave bye to Miss. And I kept thinking, he already said bye, and he's done. And he said bye. He actually verbally said bye appropriately, spontaneously. The dad kept saying, come back and wave goodbye. And I said, okay, I know our session's over, but we're going to stop and talk about this. You are looking for what you think is the only way to communicate. You missed an entire communication exchange from your child because you were looking for what you thought was right. You missed what he did, which was really sad, right? Because this is the parent, right? This is your child, and do you not see? So I wanted to share that just for context of it's a struggle within our culture. It's a struggle within our society. And yes, colonization. I grew up in South Louisiana as a Black person, and my mother was like with a ruler. She was an educator. Don't sound like you're not educated, right? Because she knew, coming from a person who didn't have civil rights, what that was like. Um, but it is. I commented on the fact that it's just so difficult for some reason for people to see outside of what they think communication should look like, and they're missing a
whole lot of communication. So hopefully these conversations can help resolve that a little. I don't know, but thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that we need to get to the bottom of it. like why is that happening? Why is there only one way to say Coca-Cola? There's not. There's tons of ways to say Coca-Cola. There's not just one way to say Coca-Cola, and your way is not the right way, and neither is your way. However you communicate Coca-Cola is perfectly fine. And I really am trying to get parents to understand, because if parents accept their kids, then that makes it easier. But thank you so much, and I'm going to mute myself because
Thanks for sharing. So we do have several read comments, and I'm gonna go through them and read them now. So starting with Don, Europeans forget that they have an indigenous history. Gaelic reflects that. And piggybacking on indigenous languages, could you please speak about relational aspects of language and the environment?
Yeah, that's relational aspects and the environment. I think that's really interesting. And, it's not something I've done a huge amount of research on, but I suppose I mentioned that Irish has, you know, this incredibly beautiful, varied language with so many words about the environment, and they are so deeply connected to place. And even, within Ireland, we have a whole range of different accents, and probably if you're not from Ireland, you're not going to hugely recognize the difference, but it's, you know, I suppose I remember reading before about how accents can kind of relate to the place, like to mountainous areas or to by the sea, and how the words and the way of expressing can be, connected to that in some really beautiful way. I think that's it's such an interesting topic. It really is. And also, just to say thanks to you as well. I thought that was a really interesting story, and it's very funny because I remember when I was 17 and I was au pairing in France, and I think I was told off. I can't remember if it was because I didn't say good night in the evening or I didn't say good morning in the morning. But it just hadn't occurred to me. I have a real problem around greetings like that. I know I need to do them, but they make no sense to me a lot of the time, because it's like, well, we're all here. You can see me, I can see you. Why do I need to explicitly say good morning or good night? But yeah, I thought that was funny.
Thank you. And I'm gonna read a comment from, have you ever had conversations with speech language pathologists? What specific differences in verbal speech do you notice between autistics versus neurotypical?
Interesting. Yeah, no, I haven't had conversations with speech therapists. I suppose going on my own experience, there are quite a few differences, and I would say I went to just to kind of highlight how it feels for me. I went to a neurodiversity in the workplace presentation in one of our universities last week or the week before. And there were quite a few neurodivergent people there, and I had such a great conversation with somebody. And for me, if I'm in work situations, normally I'm doing my internal checks all the time to see, am I saying the right thing? Am I, filling in the appropriate words and phrases? But this conversation felt so natural to me. I felt so relaxed after it. I felt I really enjoyed it. There was no kind of awkwardness. I didn't feel tense. And that's something I often experience with neurodivergent people as opposed to neurotypical people. Now, not always, because obviously, if I'm talking about climate and, topics, if I can talk about a topic, that's fine. But I think, yeah, I think my experience of chatting to other autistic or ADHD people, there are a couple of different things. I think autistic people can be a lot more direct, a lot more clear about what they think or what they want. There aren't those sort of very subtle kind of assumptions of how things are that I think I often experience in neurotypical conversations. And then, you know, friends who are ADHD or autistic often, and this is something I really relate to because my brain jumps all over the place. The conversation can take 20 different turns in 10 minutes. And I can follow that. One of my daughters is ADHD as well, and we have these conversations that jump all over the place very quickly. And my husband would sometimes be like, "What on earth are you talking about?" But we're following the train of thought. So that's just from my own personal experience, I suppose.
Dawn has missed.
Yeah, I hate to come to this conclusion, but I feel like neuronormative communication generally is just more violent, which you would think at first blush would not be the case because they hide so much. But I think there's violence in the hiding because it's about keeping power. When you're not playing with someone, if you're not vulnerable and open, that's kind of a way of hoarding power, I guess. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I had definitely thought about the power aspect because I think that is embedded in a lot of neurotypical conversations, and from things I've read or my own experiences, a lot of uh, small talk and chit chat seems to be this jostling for, who's top dog. And it just, yeah, makes no sense to me. But I think, yeah, I have to think about that actually, that there is an element of violence in it. There's certainly an element of disregard for the humanity of other people, for sure. Yeah.
I'd like to comment about well, there is a concept I think it's in sociolinguistics arena, of linguistic violence. And it is a real thing. And when I saw that topic, I said, that's probably a closer name, although what I feel is it's toxic. Like, I'm allergic to smoke. Smoke is toxic to me. And some people can live with smoke and it's not toxic to them personally, but they're still aware it's like not good for your health. And they might smoke anyway. And then there's people who smoke who really don't feel it at all, even though it might be affecting them. But it's actually toxic to me. And the first time I actually read about it in any poetic sense it was decades ago, but I read a book by Chicano women who are of ancient Mexican descent but have been American citizens for like multiple generations, and they've chosen to sort of identify as a group as Chicanos. And this was a group of women, but Spanish is still a preferred language in their families. It was called The Poetry of Violence, where literally they were talking about how the English language violated them. And a number of them had actually been sexually assaulted by folks in the white community, and they felt the experience was the same, but that the physical experience was actually more welcome than the linguistic one because it was very real and they could see when the effect ended. Like their bodies recovered, like they had therapy or whatever. Whereas the sense of the English language was like all around them. And it's not the uh, the English language in general. It's not the English that that the immigrants speak. It's not the language that the Chicanos speak. It's not the language that the African Americans speak. And it's even not so much the English that very uneducated, like Appalachian white people speak. It is that college educated. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, where's the weapon then? I accept it totally. I feel the toxicity, but where is the weapon? And the weapon is largely in the pronouns. And one of the things that because I'm still learning Irish, that I find fascinating is sentence structure itself in Irish. The verb comes first, not the subject. So you don't even get a chance to say, well, it's I who think this. It's I who have dominion over all the earth. And I'm very curious on how many indigenous languages actually have the same structure as indigenous Irish. That it's verb, subject, object. Because even in the English language, there's a sense of course, there's only one right to speak, which is to have the subject first, but that being either I or we. And then in terms of linguistics, it's kind of like a gun or anything. It can be used or misused. And that's the key for me also, is to identify, for instance, with a pronoun. When is it being misused? When should somebody be saying, that's like giving a lecture, I, instead of saying we, as we have learned, when it's only that person's opinion, but it's a way to collectively add power to what you're saying. I mean, Elon Musk was saying something about the people, we have all spoken. As soon as you claim that we, you claim power, and if you associate it in conjunction with oppressing or subverting the truth or whatever it is, it's a very real linguistic dimension to it. And if the society is still supporting the idea, which it is through education, that there's one right way to speak language. Like in France, there is I learned this, I was in France for 7 months. There's actually like language police that say there's one right way to publish in French, etc., even if there's not words in French that they need, like technological language, like in English, debugging a computer, they go find an ancient word. There's language police. We don't have language police in either England or America. We're dominant Canada, but we do have our educational system that says there's only one right way to write a sentence. And that one right way, though, that's being taught is based on documents like We the People of the United States, which everybody knows is not including people. So the use of we has been abusive, and it's been linguistic violence abusive, and it's not like some abstract concept. Like, do we have an it and a super it really is a weapon that is being used. And since I now have cognitive issues that are pretty serious and I have microbleeding going on in my brain and whatever, I am very interested in reducing my exposure, because the violence is the violence that ends up hurting the brain structure, the neurological structure. It doesn't hurt the body so much, but it hurts in a very real way. And I'm very interested in spending the rest of my life like sort of researching and minimizing my exposure to that and naming it for what it is, which I think is a critical like research area, that anyone who speaks C-wave is going to be determined. And one of the ways that they're doing determined against autistic people or anyone else for exposing it, and one of the ways now I feel it's being done in the world of academic English, is to say and have literary theory that we autistic people have no theory of mind. And that is critical to me in thinking about, because I think it directly relates to what it really means is we are refusing to generate speech in a linguistically violent C-wave dialect way, where we claim that power of we are the we. We claim that power of we are the ones who know, quote unquote, know. And the pronoun first type of sentence structure. So I would be interested in anyone in this group that knows anything about indigenous language, because I really suspect that since they're so tied to the land, and the Irish as well, that the language then, in terms of the actual speech of the sentence structure, might reflect that I am going to basically honor and respect that there's a larger we out there, which is, nature itself is much broader, and I'm just one part. So I come second in the sentence. Anyway, I know I'm kind of shaping my thoughts as I speak. But thank you all for listening.
That's yeah, that's really interesting. And actually, yeah, it's really made me think, because I suppose violence is sort of embedded in in English, in what we speak. It like it has come from, when you look way back at Old English, and how different, and there was such a mingling of cultures. And then, when England became sort of, had a quest for world dominion, the language has become something, yeah, very controlling, I suppose. Um, I think she's had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, I had. Thank you. And I wrote some of it down because there's so many ideas that I wanted to respond to, and I would have forgotten it all by now. But circling back to what Don said, English needs to be violent because it was a tool of colonialism, right? Which purpose was exploitation. So it naturally has to be that way for the project to be able to realize itself. And I think, as you mentioned, a lot of people are naturally allergic to it because of that. And, for someone whose first tongue is not English, but who has used English and lived in English speaking countries for more than a decade now, I caught myself chasing very often that ideal because people would comment, right? Oh, you sound like that. Or you have this accent. Or you're almost perfect. And especially that, oh, you're almost perfect. It really had you like, oh, I can get there. But what's the purpose of getting there? So English gives you power. It gives you dominion, quite literally gives you dominion. It grants you a job. It helps you get a scholarship, right? It would be the same with any other language if it had been exported this way. Maybe any other language that has been exported in a similar fashion is Spanish, but Spanish is not so e-commerce oriented, and I feel that the current version of Spanish that we use is older than that of English. Um, so yeah, but ultimately, I raised my hand to say this: capitalism is only 400 years old, right? Plenty of time, but very little when you think about how old this planet is. And in this very late stage collapsing onto itself, capitalism, it is already clear to most of us how and why we have been exploited. And for those who are oblivious to it, perhaps they have some kind of adoration of power that, I don't know, helps them mask the solitude. And grassroots activism like this and conversations like we're having are pushing the new way forward. So I guess my point is, let's not lose hope because we have mapped it out already. We have deconstructed it. Now we just have to supplement a new way forward. And yeah, I mean, there's plenty that still needs to be done, but plenty has been done already. That's just what I wanted to share.
Thanks. I really like that you say we have to have hope and that so much is being done. I agree. I mean, any environmental activism that isn't acknowledging capitalism is just completely futile to me. That has to be ground zero for everything, I suppose.
And Cliona. And then Dawn, I think you have your hand raised.
Just really quick, I wanted to say that little words and ideas, though, creep in and remind us. For example, to spell, it's about magic, right? It's about spelling and language create reality. They are living things that co-create reality. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. And also, I see your comment. The West forgets that words are spells where spelling came from, innately relational. Thank you. And I think also you had your hand raised a while back. Do you still have something that you want to add?
Hi, thank you. This is my first meeting. I found it very interesting about the language that Cleona was talking about, and how it's hard, to I'm an artist, so I find it language hard, visual language as an artist. And I'm an illustrator trying to be a comic book artist, and the whole thing with illustration is like the best illustrations can best be seen visually. And so I think it's like the same as like a writer, like visually we see like a character, and when in a book we can read what the character we can read like the descriptions of the character, and we can picture it in our head. And with the illustration, it's like a visual language. So I just found that interesting, and that I just found it interesting about like that, how the language hit of the whole meeting. Thank you.
Thanks. And yes.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. I just want to build on this comment about the English language and colonialism, and bring a very specific example around it. I grew up in a territory of the United States, a colony, if we are specific, and as a colonized country, you always look to the colonizer. You're brought up to think of the colonizer as the example to follow and the thing to aim for. It's what you wish to be. You wish to be white and American and speak the language without an accent, like alluded to. And so I grew up that way, aiming to be American, and I tried to speak English without an accent. And then I came to the United States for college, and something switched very quickly, and I said, wait a minute. Nothing here is my standard. Nothing here is superior to my country or to me or to my people or to my native language. And no one here is, and I'm so proud of my origin. And I gave all of that up, and I said, I am going to speak English with my accent, and I'm going to be very, very proud of it, and even exaggerate it when I can, if it comes naturally to do that, just to liberate myself from that colonialism of the linguistics. It was a symbol of liberating oneself from colonialism in general. Thank you.
Thanks. That was lovely.
We're coming up on the hour, and I always like to give a little bit of room for those people who find it difficult to jump in. So we'll just be quiet for a second and see if anybody has anything to say before we go.
It's funny. Usually I'm very talkative and it's hard for me to not talk, but lately I've been trying to do better about listening. Because I suppose you can think about how even just the simple act of talking, it's kind of necessitates kind of taking up space. But the problem is some people are naturally quiet, or that they speak when they feel they have something to say. I love that you said that, and
I love sharing stories, and so I am a talker. Lots of detention time because I am a talker. And I remember when I became a speech therapist, and I was really frustrated because, I'm young and I want to make a difference in the world. And my dad looked at me one day and said, "You ever thought they don't have as much to say as you do?" And I was just like, I don't understand. Like I didn't understand, right? Because I have like all these ticker tapes. But I wanted to go to what Dawn said about um, language and culture and communication. And just very briefly, we had, this is not really political. It's really just what it is. We had a Super Bowl halftime, and there was a lot of talk about it. And I remember uh, my someone reached out to me and said, but I didn't understand what he said. I said, I didn't understand everything he said either, but I understand what he was communicating on the visuals. I understood what the message was. So people were looking for the words, the typical communication, the verbal, and the performance was a story being told. And because they were so busy looking for what they thought communication is supposed to be, I need to hear the English words. It needs to be in the way that I can understand it. The people who didn't get the message, it wasn't for you, right? Because you weren't willing to be open to the message and the community. I mean, the visual, it was people who didn't even speak English understood the message if they were open to different ways of communicating. So I think this is a really good topic, and thank you so much, Cliona, for bringing this to light in terms of the culture and the colonialism, because I think it needs to be addressed and talked about.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's such an interesting topic, and I've the whole conversation has just sparked so many ideas in my head. Yeah, it is really fascinating.
I would love for our culture to be the bridge, because as autistic people, we have people like you come in from all over the world now to do these sessions, and we have this innate understanding, which is it's so hopeful to me. Clearly we get each other, and so that's just a beautiful thing, and it doesn't have to be the other way. It doesn't have to be violent and strife filled and generally miscommunicative and so forth. So yeah, I hope we can be a bridge. Just wanted to have one more little bit of silence in case somebody who hasn't jumped in wants to jump in before we close.
Yes.
Oops, sorry. I just thank you so much for this and everyone. I wanted to comment on what Dawn just said, and I've got to find it and post it in our group. But Abraham Hicks, which is a channeler, spoke one time. Somebody asked about autism, and they said that the autistics are here to reinvent communication. And so what Dawn just said, I feel the same way. I think we're ready to say things in a more real way and to make people say what they mean. So I'm gonna find that. It came from above, like the group of non-physical beings named Abraham. So I'll have to post that.
Are you in Casey Physics? Are you in the Casey Physics group?
Yes,
Okay.
I love it.
Okay, yeah,
We talk a lot about reinventing everything in that group. So I'm
glad
Yeah, I'm gonna have to find this and put it in there too. Okay.
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much. So here we are at the hour. This has been just an amazing conversation. I'm so glad everybody was here and had a chance to share. I always feel like it could go on forever, and it will. Casey has just started. We'll have decades of time, I hope, to really explore these things together and create, as Jill said, create a new way of expression, a new way of expressing our culture and being in the world and sharing that. So thank you so much again to Cliona. I hope you get to come back and enjoy Ireland for me. My ancestors say hello. And yes, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys when the next session rolls around. We have a physics session coming up and some other really cool things. Look at the on the Facebook page, we have an events tab that lists all of the things coming up. And we always, even if it's sort of feels like the last minute, we put the Zoom link in those descriptions to make it easy for people to jump in. So again, thank you and see you all soon.